Brian Holliday from Siemens Industry UK. Brian, your presentation is quite familiar to me, but for the purposes of people who aren't familiar with the background on automation, technology and robotic investment in the UK compared with our European and global counterparts, could you set the scene for us?
Certainly. Siemens are the global and indeed European market leader for automation technology. And I guess that position affords me a bit of an insight into the way that technology is used in both our neighbouring economies but also over in China. And what I've seen for a long time is that despite our national economy, the size of our economy, we actually consume far less automation technology and typically hover at around the same levels as Holland and Sweden, countries that you wouldn't necessarily credit with having a large manufacturing base.
Interesting. But that, just to put it in context, the reason why that's relevant to perhaps the wider conversation here at the National Manufacturing Debate is that over time, there's evidence to suggest that if one automates and mechanises one's factories more and more, so that manufacturing becomes more of a push-button exercise and there's less labour component, you will inevitably become more efficient, more productive, and you'll win more contracts. Is it that simple? Or?
I believe that it is. I believe that automation technology fundamentally boosts output, quality, and consistency. And I think it's interesting, you can look at it at a macroeconomic level and look at the productivity. For example, Lord Heseltine highlighted that it takes us a 10-hour working day to achieve what Americans can in 8. I think if you look at the German economy, it's an even more stark contrast. And so if you look at a pattern over a long period of time of consistent investment in technology, you can see productivity level changes. And I think there are some key differences. We can't compare like for like with the German market, but what we can see is consistent investment in skills and technology that have helped to boost productivity. And in Germany, often those investments have been carried out with protection for workers whose jobs are secure despite the investment. Now, a natural consequence of technology to help them do more is higher output. It's a productivity benefit. It's an ability then to build for export. And we seem culturally to have feared investment in the UK, and that's been my experience over the last 20 years, that often we are concerned more about perhaps the number of jobs or who's doing the job in one of our factories rather than investing for output in a technology which very clearly can boost productivity.
Interesting. Now, David Willetts, the Science Minister, recently mentioned or explained 8 great technologies. Now, in the context of those 8, I think what David Willetts is trying to do is to get the prime companies and universities to work more closely together to identify, where we have a comparative advantage in this country. But where the Technology Strategy Board has been brought into that conversation is to, I guess, give that a more commercial output. So, in the context of your speech, how did you get involved in that dialogue?
So I was delighted to have been asked to contribute along with the other primes, the other manufacturers present here in the UK. I think for me, and I guess it's evident that we've got a long history of design and research capability in this country. The way that research is funded, of course, has been a long-standing mechanism through HEFCE here in England, for example. But I am supportive of government's attempts to try and close the commercialisation gap. So inventors, I think John Cridland was quoted recently at the CBI as saying inventors are rarely business people. And the whole purpose of the catapult centres has been to try and close this gap between the idea creation, the things that perhaps might happen 5, 10, 20 years hence, and what companies need to be working on with perhaps a 2, 3 or 4 year pipeline for products. There's this what we've heard Dick Elsey describe as the valley of death this morning, and in much the same way, if government indeed can put more effort into looking at the front end of research in our universities for commercial outcomes, then I think the benefits will be evident right through the catapults and into manufacturers here in the UK.
So we really need to focus on those commercial outcomes to make this sort of dialogue contextually relevant to the economy, and so it doesn't just sit within to be preached among the converted. It needs to be contextualised in the context of commercial output. Yeah.
It does, and I've been delighted to see that robotics and autonomous systems have been selected as one of those 8 great technologies, an area where actually we could excel. And although we're considering, for example, robot augmentation of human effort in the home, robots for use in nuclear decommissioning that could have perhaps helped, in Japan just last year. For me, there's definitely scope, if you look at the ever-decreasing cost of technology, to do more, to use more technology in a factory. An industrial robot starting at just £15,000 now, an automation system being a fraction of the cost of what it would have been some years ago, making now the threshold for investing lower than it's ever been. This is an almost unique opportunity.
It's the right time, yeah. Many people would think, just perhaps a couple of questions, this one fairly quick if you don't mind. When we think of our peers or other countries in the G20, perhaps around the world, we may have certain preconceptions about what their factories look like, how they're making things. And I guess the rather trad vision of Chinese manufacturing is based on kind of slave labour and very, very little technology, a high labour component. But actually the reverse is true at the moment, isn't it? What's your experience of China?
My experience has been that they have dramatically increased year on year over the last 15 years their consumption of automation technology. But that says to me that they are choosing to grow by using the technology rather than people-based methods. And I guess there's a danger for us, if we see China as a competitor in this context, that rather like the Czech Republic, which leapfrogged the rest of Europe in terms of telecommunications infrastructure in the late 90s, China, I think indeed, is well set to leapfrog the rest of the world by implementing current technology without having the legacy of what for us is a 20th century manufacturing base.
Yeah, you've got to watch that space. So one of the things you referred to in the speech was that you enjoyed the simplicity of a piece written by Richard Lambert, ex-Director General of the CBI, published in the FT in February, which put down some of the facets of an industrial or a manufacturing strategy that needed to focus on 3 things, but with no less emphasis on each: people, infrastructure, and innovation. I think I've got that right. But often the innovation, the technology piece does get a little bit overlooked. And you also mentioned that you'd like to see a senior Chief Scientific Advisor have a slightly different name. Perhaps you could comment on those 2 points.
The key thing for me about what Lambert had to say was it's sustained investment. And the reason that I like this 3-tier model, if you like, is that it also works at sector level. Macroeconomic level, a national economy needs people, infrastructure, and indeed innovation. And I think we're doing some of those. Each of those are seeing investment from government. But it works at the sector level as well. And you have to look at the sector differences in manufacturing to understand the differences. You can't look at a total picture. Automotive and aerospace being 2 very good examples of sectors that have invested in technology and people in the long term and indeed are doing very well. But I think it also works at a factory level. And, great manufacturing happens when actually you've got the right people and you've invested in them. You've got the infrastructure, what we might call plant and equipment. You've invested over time. You can't just get to a point where you suddenly realise you've got obsolete technology and indeed can't keep up. And indeed in innovation, so for design and bringing in new working methods, we might call it continuous improvement in the factory.
Right.
But for me, at every level, these things have to be sustainably invested in. And of course, if we skip investment periods for a while, then that's going to damage the overall outcome, either at national macroeconomic level or indeed for individual factories.
And perhaps the rejigged or the new name for the Chief Scientific Advisor, in your view?
Well, coming to an event like this where I'm following Peter Marsh and other very credible speakers on the topic, I want to be able to also find specifics, tangibles that could help move the debate forwards. And of course, if the standing of engineering and manufacturing within that is part of the image problem that we face, part of the reason why people are not selecting STEM or science, engineering and technology careers, then actually we've got to do more to change the standing, the apparent standing of engineering. And I'd like to see engineering alongside science as a clear topic that government would clearly need input on alongside science. So change the name from Chief Scientific Advisor to Chief Scientific and Engineering Advisor, or indeed to recruit a Chief Engineering Advisor, because it's such a fundamentally important topic that impacts infrastructure spend and healthcare and demographics, the things that we've been debating here at the conference so far.
Yeah, I mean, people talk, all stakeholders talk about the importance of the engineering profession, but really for government to back themselves on how much they take it seriously, something like something like a chief engineer advisor would be the ultimate in that.
It would be a step in the right direction.
Quite. Well, Brian Holliday from Siemens Industry UK, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.